All right, ready to jump into the world of Wing Chun.
Let's do it.
So we're going deep on this legendary martial art, specifically classic versus modern Wing Chun. We've got some really interesting articles and research lined up. The goal is to give everyone a clear view of the differences and what each style has to offer.
You know, it's fascinating you're drawn to Wing Chun because at its heart, it's all about adaptation.
Mhm.
It was created for, well, the underdog, right? Overcoming a bigger, stronger opponent. So the question we're really digging into is how has it evolved over time, but without losing that core identity?
Yeah, it's like, I don't know, comparing a time capsule to a living museum. Both have history, but one's frozen, the other's, well, alive.
I like that.
Before we get into all the differences, though, let's rewind to the beginning. Origin stories. Everyone loves a good origin story. What's Wing Chun's?
So the traditional story, passed down through generations, talks about a Buddhist nun, Ningmui. She developed this fighting system specifically to empower those who, well, weren't exactly built like warriors.
Yeah.
It was never meant to rely on just pure strength. Instead, speed, efficiency, redirecting your opponent's force against them.
So more about strategy and finesse than brute force.
Exactly. Think of it as like a martial art designed for ordinary people to level the playing field.
Okay, so we've got this foundation of leverage, agility, instead of just raw power. How does that actually translate into the practice of classic Wing Chun?
You see it embedded in those structured forms. You've got the Sinam Tao, Chum Kyu, and Bu Ji. Think of them as the building blocks. The Sunam Tao, for example, that's the first form, focuses on building that strong foundation. Basic hand movements, structure, that sort of thing.
Right, like learning the alphabet before you can write, well, anything really. You need those fundamentals.
Exactly. And each form builds on the last. They get more complex, introduce new techniques.
And then there's the central line principle. Right?
Oh, absolutely. So picture an invisible line, straight down your body, head to toe. That's your center line. And classic Wing Chun is all about protecting yours while also exploiting any openings in your opponent's center line.
So offense and defense all in one.
Precisely.
It's like those old samurai movies. Strike at the heart, both figuratively and literally in this case.
Exactly.
And speaking of iconic training, we have to talk about the wooden dummy. Everyone's seen those in movies. What's the big deal with the Makyanjan?
It's way more than just hitting wood, trust me. It's about refining your technique, reflexes, developing that muscle memory. Imagine a training partner who never gets tired, always attacks the same way.
That's consistent, that's for sure.
The wooden dummy gives you that, so you can really hone your precision, your reactions.
Like having a sparring partner 24/7, even if it can't, hit back. And while we're on the topic of unique training methods, let's talk Chisa sticky hands. I've seen videos, it's kind of mesmerizing what's actually happening there.
It looks deceptively simple. But Chisao is really like years of practice condensed into these flowing movements. Two practitioners, they maintain contact, almost like a dance. But it's about sensitivity, not strength. You're learning to read your opponent, their intentions, just through the lightest touch, responding instantly.
That's incredible.
Communication without words, almost.
Like a sixth sense.
You could say that.
So anticipating, reacting in real time. This emphasis on sensitivity and reaction, really honed through practices like Chisao, it seems central to Wing Chun's effectiveness. But the way modern practitioners train to develop those skills, it's evolved, hasn't it? Particularly after the legendary Ip Man.
Ah, yes. Ip Man, Bruce Lee's teacher. He really brought Wing Chun into a new era. He understood the world was changing. Self-defense wasn't just about, ancient forms anymore.
It had to be relevant to the streets.
You got it. Ip Man, he championed this idea of adapting Wing Chun for modern practicality. Crowded streets, unpredictable attacks, maybe even multiple opponents. And that's where we really start to see modern Wing Chun emerge.
So less about perfectly custying centuries-old movements and more about if it works in a real fight, use it.
Exactly. Modern Wing Chun doesn't abandon tradition. It just asks, how do we make this relevant today? And that often means bringing in ideas from other martial arts, prioritizing functional fitness, and emphasizing realistic sparring. And you can really see that historical shift towards practicality when you look at how classic and modern Wing Chun approach training. They're pretty different.
Okay, yeah, let's get into that. We've talked about those structured forms being like essential to classic Wing Chun. So how does that training differ from a more modern approach?
Well, with classic training, it's all about mastering those fundamentals, before even thinking about extensive sparring. You can be spending years, even a decade, perfecting those forms, developing sensitivity through Chisa, really internalizing the principles.
So it's a long game. It's less about learning to throw a punch on day one and more about building that base, that
Yep.
foundation, really understanding the why behind everything.
Exactly. It's like, I don't know, think of building a house. You wouldn't start with the roof, right? You
Sure.
need that solid base. And modern Wing Chun, well, it recognizes you need to develop those practical self-defense skills and maybe a bit faster.
So not ditching the forms completely, but more like, let's get you in the game a little sooner.
Yeah, you could say that. Sparring, it often starts earlier in the training, usually with protective gear, of course.
Hmm.
But just to get students used to, well, the unpredictable nature of a real fight.
Right. Less wax on, wax off, and more, okay, let's see how you handle this right hook.
Right, exactly. In a safe environment, of course.
Of course, safety first. And this difference in training, it kind of translates into the technical aspects of each style too, right?
Absolutely. Classic Wing Chun, it really stresses that linear structure we were talking about before. Straight punches, direct lines of attack.
Almost like what? Fencing with your hands?
Yeah, there's a certain, elegance to it, a precision because of that rigidity.
Like a perfectly aligned set of chess pieces, ready to strike,
Mhm.
but with like calculated precision.
I like that. That's a good way to put it. But then modern Wing Chun, it brings in more flexibility,
And
right?
it seemed like it.
It incorporates elements from other disciplines, like the footwork you see in boxing,
Mm-hmm.
just to deal with the fact that, well, street fights, they're not static, unlike the more, I guess, fixed stance you see in classic Wing Chun.
It's adapting to the chaos, using whatever works.
Right. Some modern schools even bring in aspects of grappling because, let's face it, not every fight stays standing.
Makes sense. So it's less about like this is the one true way and more about how do we make this effective today?
Exactly. And, some traditionalists might say that bringing in elements from other martial arts, that it dilutes Wing Chun, makes it less pure. But others, they see it as a natural evolution.
Sure, yeah. Like it has to evolve to stay relevant.
It's the difference between, I don't know, a traditional calligrapher, right,
Yeah.
who spent their life mastering a single script versus a modern graphic designer. They use all sorts of tools, fonts, whatever it takes to create something visually compelling.
That's a great analogy. Both are masters, but their approach reflects how their fields have evolved. And, this kind of leads into the question I'm sure a lot of people are thinking, which style is better?
Because that's the natural thing, right? To compare and say, okay, which one wins?
Yeah, it's a natural inclination, but it's not that straightforward. It's not about one being inherently better. It's about finding what aligns with you, your goals, how you like to learn.
So it's less about which one's better and more about finding the right fit. Okay, I like that. But for someone trying to make that decision, what are the key things to think about when it comes to classic versus modern Wing Chun? Well, it really boils down to what you're looking for in, I guess, your own martial arts journey. Are you drawn to, the historical side, the philosophy behind the art, the discipline, the dedication it takes to master those ancient forms? That's where classic Wing Chun really shines.
It's like, I don't know, choosing to study ancient philosophy, but in its original language, it takes a
Yeah.
certain kind of commitment.
Exactly. But if you're more focused on like practical self-defense, what works right now in today's world, and you want something adaptable, something that's always evolving, then modern Wing Chun might be a better fit.
Right, so if classic is mastering the ancient scrolls, then modern is more about writing your own chapter, pulling from different places.
That's a great way to put it. And remember, there's no right or wrong answer here. Some people find they connect with both and end up training in both styles.
Yeah, like having a foot in two worlds.
Yeah.
You're honoring the tradition, but also embracing the new.
Hmm.
Best of both. So for someone listening, maybe feeling inspired, but also a little overwhelmed, where do they even begin? How do you start exploring these different paths?
It starts with just, checking things out. Reach out to different schools in your area, traditional, modern, whatever you can find. A lot of them offer intro classes, workshops. You can get a feel for their style, their philosophy.
The old try before you buy approach.
Exactly. Talk to the instructor, sit in on a class, maybe even try a Chisao session. You'll get a sense of what clicks for you.
I love that. It's so personalized.
It really is. And remember, learning Wing Chun, no matter which style you choose, it's a journey. You're pushing your limits physically, mentally, you're challenging yourself, and ultimately you're finding your own expression through this art.
It's not just fighting, it's self-discovery. I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've covered a lot. The history, training, all the nuances. What's the one thing we want to leave our listener with today, that thought that'll stick with them?
We've talked about these different schools, styles, like they're separate things. But at its core, Wing Chun is about you, your personal expression through movement. It's a living, breathing art form. And while those forms, that history, it's all super valuable, remember? Your Wing Chun journey, it's yours to shape.
I like that.
Hmm.
So to everyone listening, consider this your invitation to dive into the world of Wing Chun. Embrace the discipline, the innovation,